good morning and welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna, episode number 176, where we're looking at Ewen Bain's Angus Og. My name is Lorna McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service, which has 4 archive centres in the Highlands of Scotland. We have an archive centre in Inverness, one in Wick, one in Portree and one in Fort William. This series is brought to you by Highlife Highland at no cost. Highlife Highland is a charity registered in Scotland and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're really grateful for that. It does make such a big difference to us. So first of all, I'll get the awkward subject out of the way, which is I'm sure that you've been able to hear me much more clearly while they've been pre-recorded. I know that some people have an issue hearing it when it's live. It is absolutely out with my control, I'm afraid. I think it gets condensed as it gets live streamed, so I think that's why if you are struggling to hear me, there is nothing I can do about it. But it is lovely to be back live because the last few have been pre-recorded because I've been tied up doing other things. So this week we are looking at an unusual collection, a unique collection, and I know everything we have is to some extent unique, but this is unlike anything else we hold across the Highland Archive Service. This is the fantastic Ewen Bain Angus Og cartoon collection held in Skye and Lochalsh Archive Centre. So thank you to the team in Skye and Lochalsh, and particularly to Catherine McFarlane for her support in putting this together, and I'll tell you more about Catherine as we go on, because it's not the usual Catherine that I mention in Skye. So what is this collection? Who created it and how did we come to care for it? So I'm going to start by telling you a bit about Angus's creator, Ewen Bain. I know some people will have memories of this collection or thoughts to do with it, so please do share if you have those memories. So Ewen Bain was born on the 23rd of June 1925 in Maryhill, Glasgow. He was the youngest of 3 children born to John and Flora Bain. Now, I'm saying that Ewen Bain was born in Glasgow, but both John and Flora, both of his parents, were Scianachs. John came from Waternish in the northwest of Skye and Flora from Staffin in the northeast of the island. So throughout his entire life, a very strong connection to Skye. The couple had married in 1912, leaving their native Skye for Glasgow, but of course retaining their connection to both their native land and also their native language. Gaelic was the first language spoken in the house as Ewen Bain grew up. Apparently, Ewen's childhood in Glasgow was very happy. His wife recalled that it was full of laughter, full of hijinks with his siblings, and a love of art at school. His wife Sheila recalled that childhood holidays in Skye were some of his very happiest times, and this is one of Sheila's memories, talking about his happy childhood, but then says Ewen had even happier memories of idyllic summer holidays. Each year at the beginning of July there was great excitement when the hamper was brought out for packing. The signal for the early morning departure on the train to Malig, where McBrain's steamer was waiting to speed them over the sea to Skye. Ewen's mother stayed with the children during July and August, and there was more excitement when their father arrived in Staffin for his annual holiday. This was much more than a family holiday, it was coming home, and the welcome, of course, would be in Gaelic. So far we're looking at this, I don't want to overstate it or say something like magical, but idyllic, what you would hope a childhood would be. But of course, like everyone else of his generation, a change came over Ewen's life in 1939 with the outbreak of World War II when Ewen was 14. Leaving Woodside Secondary School to go to Glasgow School of Art, he was initially part of the fire watching programme in the Macintosh building in Glasgow School of Art before joining the Royal Navy in his mid-teens. And as I was putting this together, I thought, have I got that right? Because if he was 14 when the war broke out, but no, sure enough, in his mid-teens he left to join the Royal Navy. And in the Royal Navy, Ewen Bain trained as a coder, and according to his wife, he spent much of the war on convoy escort duty. And when the war finally ended, Ewen returned to Glasgow, taking up again his place in Glasgow School of Art and meeting the woman who would become his wife, who I've already referenced. Ewen and Sheila married in Glasgow in 1950. And after completing his course at Glasgow School of Art, Ewen Bain went on to Jordanhill College to train as a teacher. And he went on to teach art at various schools across Glasgow, and there are plenty of ex-pupils who had fond memories of him caricaturing them and the inspiration that he brought to classrooms. And it was while at Glasgow School of Art that Ewen Bain had some of his cartoons produced in the student magazine, but it was really into the 1950s that his work became more prolific, and also that not only his daughter Lorna, but his greatest creation, Angus, were both born, and they are intertwined, as we'll see. Sheila recalled that the birth of Lorna was intrinsically linked to the birth of Angus Og. She recalled, Ewen started drawing single cartoons to supplement our income when I resigned from teaching after our daughter Lorna was born in 1955. To guard against disappointment from early rejections, he always made sure that several batches of cartoons were in the post at any one time. It was a great thrill when some were accepted and welcome cheques started to arrive. And Ewen Bain sold his first cartoon in 1955. He produced both standalone cartoons, often very political, which were picked up by various newspapers and publishers and sometimes used as illustrations for books as well. And he also produced cartoon series, and his first series was called The Bleeps, focusing on extraterrestrials. Ewen recalled in an interview that he was about 35 when a conversation prompted him to move from The Bleeps to create Angus Og. He said, I had been doing a single cartoon called The Bleeps. It was at the time of the first Sputnik, for the Express. Their features editor asked me if I'd ever thought of doing a strip, and I hadn't. But on my way home from school, I thought of Angus. The features editor liked it, but unfortunately a new editor had just arrived and he didn't. But he didn't like The Bleeps either. So Angus went into the old Bulletin newspaper. So Angus becomes published in the Bulletin. Now in that conversation that Ewen recalls there, the features editor suggested moving a cartoon strip from out of space, where the Bleeps were, to the Highlands, to somewhere that he knew very well. And as a result, Ewen created The Adventures of Angus Og, stories of a mischievous, wily Highlander set on the fictional island of Drambeg in the Utter Hebrides. Angus Og was originally published, as I mentioned, in the Bulletin, but that newspaper didn't last for very long. It was then went on to be published in the Daily Record, which was then the country's best-selling national newspaper. And he would remain at the Daily Record for the next 30 years. And from 1971 onwards, he could be in colour, when the Daily Record became the first European newspaper to go fully colour. During all of this, Ewen was still teaching, and it wasn't until 1969 that he was able to give up teaching and become a full-time cartoonist. Work that he carried on until his untimely and unexpected death in 1989, at the age of 64. So that is the very talented Ewen Bain. But what about Angus? What sort of material are in these cartoons? How is the language, the culture and the character of the Highlands, and especially the islands, portrayed? And how are the cartoons created? And now you'll see I've got this silly, ludicrous smile on my face because I enjoyed writing this episode so much. I just kept smiling away. And when I messaged Catherine to say that, she said, yeah, he's a joy to work with. Okay, so we're going to look at what Angus Og tells us before coming to talk about how the collection came to be in our care and what we've been doing with it. The collection comprises over 6,500 original cartoons, as well as other material including the Og logs, which are working notebooks in which Ewen Bain recorded his artistic process. And I'm going to read from one of Catherine's Og blogs on the Skye and Lochash Archive website. She says, the Angus Og cartoons appeared in the Daily Record every weekday from 1960 to 1989. Each cartoon works as a humorous mini-story, whether you've read the strip before or not. However, from the outset, the cartoons were intended to form a series, and Ewen Bain's storytelling genius lies in the way in which he combines these strips into an overarching story. In the early days, editors asked for an outline of each story, but Bain worked best with artistic freedom to allow the story to develop as it unfolded. In 1982, Bain was asked, after 22 years of Angus Og, are you finding it more or less difficult to come up with entertaining situations? He said it's no more difficult and no more easier than it was 20 years ago. We know from his Og logs, his working notebooks, that each story was detailed in bullet points on the right-hand page, accompanied by draft drawings of characters or equipment featured in the story. We can see in the Og logs ideas developing as stories were planned, characters' names are changed, and prototypes are developed. It's so wonderful to have those work in progress as well as the finished products. From the Og logs, each cartoon began to take shape. Ewen Bain marked out frames in pencil and drew lines to ensure the text appeared in straight lines. Editing continued throughout the drawing process, and once satisfied with the layout, he would draw in the detail in pen and ink. In 1971, the Daily Record became the first European newspaper to be printed in full colour, and Ewen Bain developed an innovative technique of colour overlays to provide the print room with a guide to the finished colour featured in each cartoon. Editing continued even after the strips had been submitted to the paper, with notes from the editor in the margins of cartoons, and occasionally sections of text literally cut out and new text pasted on top when it was felt that the original might have been too risky. Bain, on being asked what benefits he had got from an art school education, replied, "Art school training, although by no means essential for a cartoonist, is bound to improve one's draftsmanship, powers of observation, etc." And the Angus Og cartoons are beautifully drawn, with a sense of depth and perspective not often seen in newspaper cartoons. For all Bain was a serious artist, his sense of fun shines through. He plays with frame boundaries and illustrated onomatopoeia. He adds humorous detail into the background of images and enjoys breaking the third and fourth walls. Drambeg existed vividly and in colour in Bain's mind, even as it was drawn and printed in black and white. It remains an important part of cultural life in Scotland throughout the latter part of the 20th century. And again there I thought there's no point me reshaping that when I can read to you Catherine's thoughts on it. The cartoons are full of humour and nods, either overt or subtle nods, to Western Isles life and culture. And Ewen Bain himself said that Angus was inspired by some of the men that he had met in Skye, who were grown men still living with their mothers and still being treated like adolescents. Angus Og, meaning young Angus, which is often what his mother calls him. He was quick to point out, however, that he didn't think this was peculiar to Skye and to other islands, and he assumed that such characters must exist elsewhere. And of course Angus doesn't live in Skye, he lives in Drambeg, an amalgam of various Hebridean islands, but with some definite similarities to Skye. One of my favourite things when looking through these, and I have looked of course at nowhere near the 6,000 of them, is the use of language, and you'll know from the previous 170 something episodes of this that language is something I love to learn about and read about. It's what my degree is in. So it's something that immediately when I started to look at these, the language was the thing I really enjoyed. Not only Gaelic, which does obviously feature, but the use of dialect words, the use of Hebridean pronunciation, they greatly enrich the content, and they add layers of humour, enabling people to engage differently with the collection depending on their own knowledge. So someone who is in Skye will read these differently, but they will still be appreciated by people elsewhere. So Angus Og, young Angus, lives in Drambeg, a wee dram, with his mother and his younger brother Tonald. I absolutely love that. I love that the names and the words that start with D's have had that T written in that very classic Western Isles pronunciation. fun is gently picked at characters through their names, like the lawyer Mr. McPhee, the teacher Miss McJotter, and various others. Marilyn is a blonde named after Marilyn Monroe. It's noted that all resemblance stops there. She harbours an endless passion for Angus, and she describes him as him of the raven locks and the Wellington boots. And that beautiful, gentle Western Isles dialect and accent isn't just showcased in the names, but throughout. So frequently, the one that made me smile every time I saw it, Seamus and Tuggy, Dougie with a T, describe how they just don't know what the world is coming to at all. And that very classic pattern of speech. When Angus sees a way to make money by turning his mother's house into a folk museum, she asks if the tourists will really pay 5 shillings just to see this, to which Angus replies, "If yourself is agreeable, mother." Classic word order again. Like, just you leave it to myself. Just really adds colour and warmth to the cartoons. We often see By Jove in there. We see Effry and Nefer frequently appearing. Angus being described as a bachel, or a tuchter. So many words that, as I say, you can understand if you're not from the area, but they carry a different symbolism if you are. And it's not just the Hebridean accents that appear. Bain's life in Glasgow is also very evident. Certain characters using like Ra for the, like Ramora for tomorrow, and a wealth of other different examples. It's just a complete joy if you like language. So we know some of the characters and some of the places now, but what are the cartoons about and what are the stories that are in them? I mentioned that there are thousands of cartoons and that they can be read individually, but they were created as sets of overarching stories, 158 adventures of Angus Og. Many focus on one of Angus's harebrained money-making schemes, dozens of cartoons telling the full story of the whole undertaking and how it invariably goes wrong. In Angus Og and the Folk Museum, Angus sees the opportunity to earn money from the tourists interested in traditional island life. And after using his own house, causing great upset to Donald and his mother, he uses the cottage of Granny Marbrochen, the local spaewife or fortune teller, while she's in hospital, with the help of his best friend Lachie Moore, Big Lachie. And as usual, his scheme fails and Angus ends up in the doghouse. Not quite literally, but if you read it, you'll see it's not far off. So that's one example. Angus Og and the Gaelic, which I very much enjoyed, sees Angus setting up the Og College of Instant Gaelic for the tourists after accidentally teaching the laird's wife Gaelic in one lesson, thanks to spilling a dram on Granny McGrochen's magical dictionary. I laughed out loud at him giving the Gaelic to the Auchenshugo Gaelic choir getting ready for the mod, except to the one person who already has the Gaelic in the choir. The laird and his wife are constantly poked fun at in the cartoon, although perhaps not quite as mercilessly as politicians and Thatcher in particular. The gap between the landowners and the island's residents is illustrated through every part of the cartoons. Their names, so the laird and his wife are called Fingal and Mabel, their clothes, their housing, and particularly their language, all of them illustrate the huge, potentially unbreachable gap between the two existences. The laird's lack of understanding of Drambeg residents' lives and traditions is palpable in almost every place that they appear. The authority of the police, and particularly of the church, gets a gentle mocking as well. And this is perhaps best illustrated in Angus Og and the Fete, where the idea of holding a fete to raise money for the church roof turns the island into complete chaos. The Kirk Session don't want raffles, and they don't want tombolas, and the police, keen to stay in with the Kirk Session, ends up locked up in his own jail as he tries to prevent the fete taking place. So we have the policeman locked in the jail because he doesn't want to upset the Kirk Session. and the situation escalates until the Secretary of State for Scotland and eventually the Prime Minister become involved, sending the Navy in to quell the unrest in the Outer Hebrides. The islanders prepare for this by raising prices and opening B&Bs. A second wave of invaders come in the shape of the press, and the islanders prepare for this by decorating and putting out their best face for the cameras. And Angus makes money out of the troops who have been sent to quell the unrest by selling them Highland cow souvenirs made in Hong Kong. The troops end up helping with everyday tasks in the island, including rebuilding the church, while they wait for the constable, who's been fed on only bread and whiskey, to sober up. And in the end, a blind eye is turned to the rising, the uprising as it's recorded, by politicians who say they want the votes of these people. And Angus once again loses all the money that he's earned during the whole adventure. Those are only a few examples of stories. I could have told many others. And I'll tell you one last one, a very quick overview of it, which is Angus Og and the Seer of Drambig, in which Angus accidentally turns back time when he's trying to fix a clock. And he and his family find themselves in the 19th century with the clearances happening around them. A really lovely little touch. The minister refuses to help and leads the congregation in singing "The Laird's My Shepherd." Thought that was a very lovely, powerful touch. They then go back to the 16th century, and then to the Viking era, and then to the era of Columba and beyond, before finally returning to the present day, all because of a broken clock. But I want to spend the last part of today's episode telling you about how we come to have this wonderful collection, how you can see examples from it, and how you can see what we're doing with it and why it's such an important collection. After Ewen Bain's death in 1989, Angus Og to some extent left the public consciousness. There was a bit of academic interest in studying the cartoons and looking at their reflections on society and culture, politics and life in the Western Isles, but they weren't available for study, and it wasn't even clear where they were. And then, in 2019, Lorna Bain, Ewen's daughter, whose birth was the catalyst for Angus's birth, was on holiday in Skye. And in the post office she started chatting away about the cartoons, resulting in her deciding to donate her father's entire collection to our archive centre in Skye and Lochalsh, bringing Angus and Ewen back to their spiritual home. And as soon as the extent of this collection became apparent, and knowing the importance of the cartoons with their ability to reflect issues that are still relevant in Skye today, such as the impact of tourism, the loss of Gaelic language, the social imbalances that can be found, it soon became apparent that the existing team in Skye and Lochalsh would need support in both cataloguing this collection and in making a programme of events and activities around it. And so we were successful in an application to receive £40,000 of funding from the Scottish Government's National Island Plan. And the aim of that fund is to support the development of cultural and historic resources and encourage island residents to engage with and participate in arts and culture. So a perfect fit for what we wanted to do with Angus Og. And this meant that we were able to fund a dedicated post, a project officer, whose sole focus would be to research, digitise, conserve and promote this collection, something which, as I say, would have been impossible due to current workloads of other staff. So we were delighted when Catherine McFarlane was appointed, and this is the Catherine I said I would come back to, a local Gaelic-speaking writer, and this enabled us to provide local employment, but also meant that any curation of the Angus Og collection would retain the island at its centre as it was created with. And that's really important. We did an audit of the collection, so Richard, our senior conservator, supported that to assess what the conservation needs were, which included removal of much sellotape, and you've heard my opinions on sellotape before. As soon as we went public with the announcement that we had this collection, the press and public interest was substantial around the collection being in Skye, and it received national news coverage. And so a launch event was held in Staffin Village Hall, where Ewen Bain's mother had been from. And the archive team were joined not only by members of Ewen Bain's family, but by local musicians, by Scotland's leading comic artist Frank Whiteley, who has been involved in various projects which I'll come back to, and Professor Lawrence Grove, an expert in comic art and in text image culture. And alongside them, they were joined by many, many, many locals of all ages. Rona Flynn said that her father would have been absolutely blown away to imagine that so many people would have come together to share and remember his work. For Frank Whiteley, who's worked on high-profile comics like X-Men, Batman, Superman, all sorts of other things, Bain had already been a role model. He said Ewen Bain was creating real art that went beyond the two-dimensional depictions so often found in cartoons. Seeing someone from Scotland succeeding in this field made me feel that I too could pursue this art as a career, and I hope that some young people have been similarly inspired by the collection and the conversations this evening. And this is what Professor Lawrence Grove had to say about this collection. For Scots who remember the pre-internet age, Angus Og is an icon. He lives his adventures at home, the distinct island of Drambig, but also further afield. It circulates with a variety of characters in whom we all recognise someone, deals with world affairs while remaining local, and above all, amidst the seriousness, constantly makes us laugh. All this comes through the artistry of a fine-line craftsman, Ewen Bain, whose work, like that of Uderzo or Hergé, is so enticing that we sometimes overlook the attention to detail. Yet out with Scotland, Angus Og is barely known, despite indeed having the trappings of an Asterix or a Tintin. Yet, like those comic culture giants, Angus too is ingrained in the popular psyche of his home nation. So why then the international oversight? Prior to the internet age, peripheral cultures were less discoverable, just like the beauties of the Utter Hebrides and their real-life imitations. Although travel may be ecologically dubious, it is now time for the world to come to Drambig. And since that first event in Staffin, Catherine has been incredibly busy, cataloguing, digitising, running events, creating online content. There's an exhibition in Skye and Lochailsh Archive Centre where people who are able to get into Portree can spend some time learning about both Ewen and Angus. Plenty of interactive elements and things to think about and discuss and go away and ponder. Additional funding from the Highland Council's Ward Fund meant that a travelling exhibition could be created to visit village halls and events and festivals across the Highlands, and hundreds of people have interacted with Angus through that project. Young people have been particularly inspired by this collection, just as Frank Whiteley was all those years ago. And so Tiernanog was born, the land of the young, an after-school graphic arts club for the young people aged 13 to 16 held in Skye. The young people are able to explore these cartoons within the collection and then produce their own creative response to the issues discussed, as well as having a conduit to be able to express other issues that are important to them and important to their communities. Highland Cares provided additional funding to support the purchase of resources for this part of the wider Angus Og project. So finally, if you want to learn more about the whole Angus Og collection, and of course see some of the examples, because I'm conscious that I'm talking about something that's very visual, if you can't get into Skye and Lochailsh to look at that exhibition, then please check out the website. I saw, Jen, your question, but I see that one of my wonderful colleagues has already responded to that. You can get on to the website where you will have access to blogs, to full cartoon strips, and here's my little punt that I don't often get to do for different things. You can even go onto our website and buy some of the finished books, so those full overarching stories. So many people asked if there was a way to purchase that. We produced some of them, as well as some mugs. And there are lots more plans for Angus, from community events to academic partnerships. Angus is proving to be an easy way in to discussing some of the challenges facing our island communities today. It's a brilliant collection. It's full of humour and full of deep insights. So a gentle, light mockery and a very deep understanding of life in an island community. I want to give the final words of this episode to Catherine McFarlane. I've borrowed Angus today from her, but I wanted to talk about him and about Ewen, and to use the platform that is Learn with Lorna to talk about this collection. But really, Catherine is the one who spends most time with him as the project officer. So I asked her how she felt about the collection, and this is what she said. My final words of the episode going to Catherine. Working with the Ewen Bain Angus Og collection is a real privilege. The Angus Og cartoons are stunning pieces of art, and Ewen Bain is such a gifted storyteller that each of the strips is full of wit and really entertaining. There's been a lot of laughter as we've sorted, conserved and catalogued this fantastic collection. Rereading all of the stories highlights their importance in discussions around Scottish social history, but also reveals how relevant many of these issues still are. It's been a pleasure touring the exhibition and hearing wonderful anecdotes about Angus Og, seeing a whole new audience entertained by the exploits on the island of Drambeg, and particularly seeing how this collection inspires individuals and communities to embrace art and storytelling as a way of exploring contemporary issues faced in their own communities today. Alongside the Angus Og cartoons, the wider Ewen Bain materials held within this collection provide a valuable glimpse into the evolution of the Glasgow Gaelic cultural world during the latter part of the 20th century. She says, I'd encourage anyone with an interest in cartoons or any aspect of Highland and Island life to come along to the Archive Centre and explore the exhibition, the wider collection, and share in the magic of Angus. And I would absolutely back that up. So if you're interested and you want to find more about this collection, please do either visit or check out the website. I see that it's already been put up, but I'll put up another post with all the links and the links to the books as well. It'll give you an insight into life in Scotland, life in the Highlands, and particularly life in the islands. So thank you very much for joining me. Thank you again to Catherine McFarlane for all the work she had already done on this, making it a very easy and fun episode for me to write. So I hope you can join me next week. Next week we'll be looking at ships, coasts and lifeboats to work to tie in alongside the 200th anniversary of the RNLI. So I hope you can join me then. But a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there is no payment or subscription required to take part. But if you are able to donate towards our work, there's a link to be able to do that in the text, and we're really very, very grateful for it. Thank you so much for joining me and for smiling along at Angus with me. Thank you.